Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another seaweed session during Seaweed Days. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon to be with us. Today, we have a very exciting conversation ahead of us. My name is Erin. I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement with Cascadia Seaweed, and I am very pleased to be your host for this seaweed session about the family table with Chantal Davis. Chantal was actually the winner of our National Nutrition Month social media contest in March and won this spot. And we have worked together in the past, so I'm very excited to have Chantal join us today. Before I hand it over to our expert, Chantal, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about her. It's a beautiful story. Chantal dreams of a world where families join together in the kitchen to create meals that are not only delicious and exciting, but that also nourish our bodies for the days ahead. Where community means coming together and sharing ingredients, homegrown produce, recipes, and experiences around food. Where our body shapes and sizes don't matter. Where family isn't defined by a nuclear number, but by those you share your meals and memories with. Chantal has been a professional chef for almost 20 years and spent much of her career working in some of Vancouver's busiest and hottest restaurants. She has also managed her own catering and meal prep business on the side. She has a passion for inspiring people to make vegetables the star of their meals. Since graduating from the Canadian School of National Nutrition, she incorporates her knowledge to help clients and groups learn how to meal plan for their busy lifestyles. She is currently working on shifting her business to a program that will teach families, and more importantly, children, how to eat intuitively and to love their bodies as they are today. She is local to Victoria, BC, lives there with her husband and her two children and their lively puppy. And over to you, Chantal. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks for everyone that's joining for the talk today and watching the recordings later. Erin pretty much summarized my intro for myself, but just a little bit extra background. I've been a professional chef for 20 years, and through most of that time, I have focused mostly on vegetables. I've been a vegetarian and vegan on and off for most of my life, so plants are really important to me, and inspiring people to look beyond vegetables as a side dish is something that I'm very passionate about. I've been practicing nutrition for over a year now, and when I first got into the industry, working with clients and putting them on restrictive diets and mindsets just wasn't something that was working well for me, and diets just don't seem to work for most people. And I discovered this movement that's gaining traction in the industry called intuitive eating and body neutrality. And it's something that's not dramatically changed my life, or something that's changed my life so dramatically that I feel the need to share this with many people. The dramatic change for my life wasn't just for myself either. It has dramatically changed just our entire household and dynamic around mealtime, and how my kids have grown to approach food with a very different attitude. And it's just been such an inspiring year for us to go down this path. A little bit of background: intuitive eating is a philosophy that basically makes you the expert of your body and the hunger signals that come with that. So obviously the main hunger signal that we think about is whether or not we're hungry, but the other signal we need to look for is whether or not we're satiated and satisfied. And we spend so much of our life as adults disembodied from our body that we actually forget what those signals feel like, and we no longer eat within the realm of what our body's actually asking for, and either end up on a diet or punishing ourselves for eating things that we don't feel like we're supposed to. Quick little summary of that is basically intuitive eating is the opposite of a traditional diet because there's no guidelines or restrictions. You learn to tune into your own body. And adding on to that, one of the first kind of things you approach when you're learning how to become an intuitive eater is learning to neutralize your body and the relationship you have with it. So it promotes acceptance in a way that encourages you to recognize abilities and non-physical characteristics of your own self. And it decentralizes your body as an object and challenges the myth that your appearance has anything to do with your worth and your value to take up space in the world. And it's so important for us as parents, especially in this age of hyper social media, to encourage our children to not attach our looks as part of our value. I find even for me, the last kind of 20 years of my life, I've missed out on a lot of opportunities and exciting activities because I was so worried about how others were perceiving me that I just wouldn't go and attend these things, whether it was a networking event or a day at the beach or something like that. And it's not just me doing this. A lot of people hold back from experiencing life because they're so attached to what other people are going to think. And it's heartbreaking really to see how people do live their lives. And once you kind of start to understand how to neutralize that, it's a life-changing experience. And it really teaches you how to be in the moment and stop being so up here in your head and start attaching back to your body so that you can learn to look for those hunger cues. A good place to start if you're interested in learning more is just noticing when you're starting to feel hungry. Often you'll get a sudden onset of a thought about food or something like that. That's a good indication that it's time to eat. We always kind of wait to feel that hunger pain in our stomach. And for many of us, that's not the first indication that we need to eat. A lot of us entrepreneurs and hardworking parents tend to put ourselves to the side to make sure that we are doing everything we can for our kids, and we forget to feed ourselves. And it can just lead to irritability, poor mental and cognitive functions. And it really just leads us down a path where we are calorie deficient and not living our own best lives. So that's just a little bit of a background on intuitive eating. How I fit in today, for me, seaweed is one of those ingredients where a lot of picky eaters, not just kids, but adults, look at seaweed and go, oh, I don't really know if I want to eat that, and not realize just how diverse seaweed can be in the diet. It doesn't just have to be those, little chips that you can buy at the store. You can integrate seaweed in so many different ways into your meals. I don't like to attach too much nutritional information to items, but seaweed is an excellent source of antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, fiber. But the other great thing with seaweed, especially if you're like me and you eat a predominantly plant-based diet, is if you add the seaweed, especially like a kelp or konbu, into the water or broth that you're cooking grains in, it actually helps make them more digestible and what we call bioavailable. So it actually helps us better absorb the nutrients in the grains. So just a little tip for you, if you don't like eating just a straight seaweed salad, you can actually integrate it. And my award-winning recipe, which I will be releasing for my June newsletter, Erin's going to put up the link to that if you're interested. We call it the green monster pasta because it tastes so good that you actually don't realize how many nutrients are in there. And it's packed with seaweed and zucchini and a whole bunch of herbs that aren't just basil. There's parsley in there. And it's actually got a base of silken tofu. So it's protein dense without kids really realizing just how many nutrients that they're getting into their bodies. I don't like getting into the practice of encouraging people to sneak food into their kids. So my kids are very aware that there's all these great tasting ingredients in the pasta, but it's just a different way of presenting something that might eliminate a bit of the picky eater that you might have in your house. Some of the things that you can do right off the bat that are easy for most families is to change the narrative and avoid using any words that attach value to a kid's appearance. So it's totally okay to tell your kid that they look fantastic in an outfit that they're wearing, but leave it at that and don't attach it to an activity or something that they're doing. You can comment on something else like that separately. I like to use examples, especially when we're talking about eating with kids. A lot of us get into the habit of saying, there's nothing wrong or nothing to be scared of it, just try it. And instead, when we're looking at an intuitive eating approach, we want to talk more something about along the lines of something. Sometimes we're into trying things and sometimes we're not. And if you're not today, that's okay. We can come back to this tomorrow. Or encouraging them with comments like, I'm glad you're listening to yourself. Here's something else that you enjoy if you want to try it, and then we can come back to this later. And just kind of taking those negative words out of things that we would normally approach and adding in something that would boost their confidence using characteristics they already have. Another really important thing when you're trying to combat picky eaters is to use a vocabulary that doesn't create a scarcity mindset. So, something along the lines of usually saying, okay, if you have 3 more bites of these carrots, you can have another slice of pizza or a treat or something after that. And that creates a scarcity mindset in both adults and kids' minds. That's why diets don't work, because when we restrict foods, we're all of a sudden creating that scarcity mindset for ourselves. So when we do get our hands on it, we're usually guilty of binge eating something. So instead, using those positive reinforcements of just, you're doing a great job. I'm really proud of you for trying this. Now you can move on to whatever you feel is going to work for your body. You'd be absolutely surprised just how intuitive most kids are. And in fact, for children, they are born as intuitive eaters. Babies are probably the most practiced and expert intuitive eaters we have. And then as they grow up, because of diet culture, we tend to move away from being an intuitive eater and start locking on to the way society's taught us to eat. So for a baby, they'll often have some sort of signal, whether they cry or they're moving their hands, suggesting that they're hungry. So we latch them onto the breast or bottle. And then when they're done, they'll unlatch. And that's them listening to their baby body saying, I'm good for now, we'll come back later. And that's something really good to do with kids too. So, keep that in mind, and remember that they're human. Like I'm a human. I'm an adult. I have days where I'm not hungry or days where I'm craving a pasta or something like that. Kids are exactly like that, and they really deserve an opportunity to speak for themselves and use that knowledge for themselves, saying, I'm not super hungry today. I'm not going to finish my lunch. And that's actually, it's been really great and peaceful at our house when they come home and haven't finished their lunch. They talk to me about why they didn't that day, whether it was a lack of time or they were just full or something like that. And I'm going to still send the exact same out the next day, because the next day they might be hungrier and finish their lunch. So just finding that balance and not guilting them or using any kind of negative feedback of, I'm disappointed you didn't finish your lunch or something like that. You can always offer them the rest of their lunch as a snack too if they're hungry. And shifting the focus from perfect nutrition to fostering a good long-term relationship with food. So that's why I said a little while ago, I don't like to attach too much nutritional value to stuff, especially when we're talking about some of those things that we would typically coin as bad or unhealthy, like sugar. It's okay for everyone, except maybe somebody who's diabetic or has a medical reason, to have a reasonable amount of sugar in the week. And we don't need to teach kids right off the bat to feel guilty when they're enjoying a cookie. Just enjoy the cookie and move on with the day. We don't have to make up for it with going for a walk later in the day or having a carrot or something like that. It's just food, and we need to learn to tune back into our roots and enjoy that. So the big philosophy with integrating a better mealtime with picky eaters is something in the intuitive eating world called the division of responsibility. And basically what that does is it acknowledges what parents are responsible for during mealtime and what kids are responsible for during mealtime. And you can actually start this process as soon as you start offering solids to your kids. You're going to have a little bit more hands-on, because obviously their dexterity and stuff isn't quite as good as even a toddler's is, but you can find a balance that works from your perspective. For the parents, all that you're responsible for is selecting foods, preparing the foods and serving them, and then obviously setting the times when that's going to happen. The kids are responsible to decide what to eat from what is offered and how much they want to eat. So for us at home, we don't load their plates up for them anymore. We let them do that. And I find that when we've been trusting them to do that, that they actually eat their dinner. And I think in a lot of circumstances, it's probably better to let them eat their plate of choice as opposed to loading up a plate with foods they don't want to eat and sending them off without eating anything or adding stress to mealtime or anything like that. Just as a side note, from a nutritional and digestive perspective, stress during mealtime is very detrimental to your digestive system, and it can lead to a lot of digestive issues and upset tummies for everyone. So trying to remove any stress that could be added onto a mealtime by using the positive language mindset and giving kids more control over what they're consuming and how much they're consuming really helps reduce that stress during mealtime. And the other tip there, I've got kind of 5 top tips that you can start integrating for division of responsibility right away. One of them is to make it exciting. So don't just cut a bunch of carrot sticks and serve them. Try and cut them into a variety of shapes or textures, especially if you have like a mandolin slicer or something. You could do waffle carrots one day or something that might change the kids' perspective of what they're eating and making it unique and fun. And this is a great way to integrate kids into the kitchen. Cookie cutters are usually pretty good, especially with some of the softer vegetables like cucumber or even an apple. If you were adding fruit into dinner or something, you could get them to cut out little cookie stars or something, and that would help get them excited. So inspire them to be in the kitchen with you. That's my second tip. Our daughter, we've been experimenting adding the fresh prep meal service in a couple of times a week. And one of those nights, my daughter and our babysitter have been cooking dinner for us. And this last Wednesday, they cooked dinner, and my daughter was so excited to have the responsibility of following the recipe and leading the way that not only did she cook dinner, but she set the table, she cleared the table, she was pushing all our chairs in for us, and all of this was without us asking her. And then she actually grabbed a chair and went up to the sink and started doing dishes. She did a terrible job. We had to go redo the dishes, but she was so enthusiastic about it and just so pumped that we were trusting her to handle the process that her attitude shifted from, oh, I have to help clean up, to let me get that for you. Let me be involved in this. I just want to help and be a part of this. And my daughter's 6, so we've been slowly integrating her into the kitchen, doing things like cutting shapes and stuff. If you have younger kids, what you could do, especially if you were making like a bread dough or a pasta or something, just give them a little piece of dough to play with. And, they're just happy to be around and be a part of it. We spend so much time in our lives being busy that often when we get home, dinner's a rushed experience, and we don't necessarily think we have the time to integrate our family because we're trying to get dinner on the table so we can spend time with them. And instead, maybe just take it as time spent with them and start creating meals where you're actually working together as a community, and building that relationship with yourself and your kids and your food. And provide, my third tip is to provide pressure-free opportunities for kids to try food. So this is where using that positive language is important. And instead of offering them a new vegetable or something that's cut in a different way with a "this might be weird or scary" type conversation, you just add it in with food that they would normally enjoy and praise them for being brave enough to try it. And then be a role model. Set that example for them. Be excited about your own food. Be vocal about, I've eaten most of my plate, but I'm full, so I'm either going to save this for later or it's going to go into the compost. And let them learn that you're tuning into your own hunger cues and that you're also not going to be worried as much about the diet side of things, because it's so important for them to see us being that role model. I like to make sure my kids see me eating a fruit or vegetable that I'm not a huge fan of once a week as well, because that helps show them that there's different ways to try things that might taste it differently. So if they don't like cucumber just as a stick, maybe they'll like it grated into some yogurt as a tzatziki sauce, or marinated in something as a salad, or made into a pickle. And I'm going to demonstrate to my kids that I'm trying this cucumber in a different way, and now I'm enjoying it. So just creating that adventure mindset for kids is really great. I like to take my kids to the grocery store too and find the weirdest produce they have available and just get them absolutely pumped about it. So having that excitement and really helping them visualize the beauty of color that we have available for produce, especially since we have so many different products available coming from all areas of the globe for us to try. So if you go to the grocery store and they've got beautiful pink dragon fruit or something, get really amped up about it. And kids are more likely to want to try something. I got my son hooked on Brussels sprouts when he was 18 months old because we were at our local farmer's market and they had these big long branches of Brussels sprouts, and that was just mind blowing to him that that's how they looked. The same was with our kids with seaweed. We don't just eat those snack crackers. We incorporate seaweed quite a bit into our meals. And it was getting them pumped up and going to the beach and looking at different seaweed and playing with it that really got my kids becoming seaweed addicts now. And, you know, they actually specifically ask when we order or make sushi, can we have the seaweed on the outside, or can you add some of this seaweed into this soup or something that you're making? So just spinning it at a different angle and inspiring adventure is often a great step. So those are kind of some important tips and tricks that you can do. One of the other major ones for the division of responsibility is to have a routine. So you don't always have to eat at the exact same time, but making sure kids understand that for your family, if it works, that you're going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner available and maybe a couple snacks will help them plan out their hunger cues for the day. You know, so one of my children isn't a huge breakfast eater, so they might have an oat breakfast bar or something, but he knows a snack is going to come too. And that's usually when he'll load up on his morning calories. So he understands that if he's not hungry right now, there's food later. Some of the other things we can do that aren't limited to just being part of the division of responsibilities is serving meals family style. So you could either dish up in the kitchen if you're not wanting to create a bunch of dishes, or you could put things into nice dishes and put them on the table and then let the kids create their own plates. And then, like I mentioned earlier, always serving one or two foods that you know they're going to like, because they're going to need to eat. So if your kids are young and they love pasta, there is nothing wrong with introducing new foods alongside pasta 3 or 4 nights a week, especially if you're able to get them eating some of these more nutrient and protein dense pastas, like the chickpea based ones or the whole wheat ones or something like that, because you're still going to get a decent amount of nutrition into them. Another thing to do is to not barter and bribe kids. So like I mentioned before, not doing that. If you have 3 bites of a carrot, you can have a treat kind of thing. You have to avoid validating picky behavior. And that's one of the biggest misses that we do as parents, is bartering with them and giving them the attention that they're usually seeking when they're being picky. So instead, switching to a positive mindset and just leaving it and let them choose whether or not they want to try it, and then come back to it another day if they don't. And the other big one is to close the kitchen between your meals and snacks. So gently remind them that they'll have another chance to eat, and that's by setting that schedule, but the kitchen's closed between meals. And so if they decide to not eat at that meal, they're going to understand what hunger feels like, and by the next meal probably be a little bit more open to eating something else. So those are important. What are the benefits to doing this division of responsibility and looking at the intuitive eating? It fosters autonomy and allows children to not attach their value to what they eat and how much they ate, because we're not providing them with negative feedback. So it allows them to have a different relationship with food, especially if you're able to kind of take any of the diet culture related topics out of it. So like I said before, not focusing on that sugar's bad for you, or that eating white pasta isn't healthy, or especially attaching any kind of devaluation to carbohydrates, because there's such a vast group of carbohydrates that we should be eating that are great for us. And they kind of tend to get grouped in with all these other bad ones that we refer to. It also builds self-awareness and trust. So, you know, like I just said, if you're closing the kitchen between meals and your kids are starting to understand what hunger feels like, now they're going to know that they need to eat when they're feeling that feeling, and they're going to build their plate in accordance to do that. It also builds trust with you. If you're not always on them about eating things or looking a certain way or behaving a certain way, they're going to start to trust you and want to have that deeper relationship with you when it comes to food. And it teaches them to be embodied. It teaches them to listen to their body and do that kind of stuff. I always like to use Halloween as a great example. Most kids are going to go overboard on the sugar because it's Halloween. I mean, most parents go overboard on the sugar, and we know how we're going to feel the next day. And it's okay to feel that way the next day, but not waking up, especially as a parent, and, making a point of saying something along the lines of, now we're going to eat really healthy today to make up for yesterday, or I've got to go for a jog or something like that. Just leave it at the food. They enjoyed it. We're going to move on. We all have a right to eat the next day, and we're just going to continue eating without acknowledging that we're feeling guilty for something. And it nurtures joyful experiences. So, we're human. We need food to survive. We're going to eat for the rest of our lives. And I certainly hope that more and more people can start to lose that grasp that diet culture has had on our society for so long, and start getting back to the basics of, enjoying meals with your family, and hopefully soon community and stuff like that. And, really building relationships through food. I moved into a new neighborhood last year, and my whole life I've always dreamed of living around people where I can barter with them for food. So I've got a neighbor who raises chickens, and another neighbor who fishes, and another neighbor who grows things I don't grow. And we trade each other. And I absolutely just love that dynamic so much. And showing kids that there's a better way to do things is so great, and, building that community and memory for them. So, those are my kind of major tips for dealing with picky eaters. The top one is just don't stress about it. We're human. None of us are perfect. None of us are going to have a perfect eating schedule. And there's no sense stressing about something when we can just learn to enjoy it. So thank you so much for listening to me. And I'm going to hand it back to Erin for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Chantal, for that inspiring talk. As a parent of two, I can relate to many of the scenarios you're presenting. And I actually just listened to a positive mindset parenting podcast a couple of weekends ago while I was folding laundry. And a lot of the things that you were talking about are similar to what they were saying in the podcast. Just choosing your words intentionally, and reframing things to be more positive and things. But they didn't specify that we should do that around mealtime. So I think what you've emphasized here is that that's important for building long-term relationships with food and with our bodies. So I think that's really important, not just for parents, but for people of all ages to remember. I was hoping that you could go through your 5 tips again, just in a summarized way. Just tell me what they are so I can write them down. I think that would be really helpful.
For sure. So cutting food into a variety of shapes and textures.
Okay.
Providing pressure-free opportunities to try food.
Okay.
Inspiring them to be in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Be a role model.
Yeah.
And then close the kitchen between meals.
Okay, let's talk about that one a little bit. You can't go cold turkey on this. I'm sorry for the phrase of cold turkey, but if I close the kitchen in between meals, I would have a chaotic house, I think, because my kids are not in tune with their hunger, what were you calling it? Their
satiety?
Yeah, or their triggers, right? Whether they're really hungry or whichever. So talk to me a little bit about how somebody like me would ease into this closing the kitchen in between meals and snacks.
So one of the things that I first did, because I'm guilty too, I was horrible. And I think even worse because I was so dug into nutrition a while ago that I was probably harder on my kids than everyone. So what I started off doing, instead of having snacks available between meals, there was a rule that they could trade their dinner or lunch for a banana or an apple, which both of my kids will happily eat. So finding an alternative at the beginning is a good start for that. Or even for dinner, there's nothing wrong with serving dinner and serving dessert or fruit with the dinner. So at least they're eating something. But sticking to that schedule of closing that kitchen is what's going to tune them into their hunger cues. Now, if they're all of a sudden really hungry and irritable, it's okay to serve dinner an hour early to your kids. You don't have to eat with them. It's just important that you sit with them and build that bond. So just finding the balance that works. I realize it's hard to do as a parent. It was hard for us, and that's why we implemented that. Okay, you can have a banana instead.
So let's talk about the coming home from school and that witching hour. Everybody's just coming home from work or from school. You look at their lunch kit, and it is still has a significant amount of their lunch in it. The parents are trying to organize dinner. The kitchen is essentially closed because it's in between mealtime, but they're past hunger. So they're already irritable, and dinner's not ready. I don't have something to serve them. So is this what you're saying? I would then offer them a banana or an apple?
You could, or for us, what's been working is that I've been either allowing them to finish their lunch as dinner, or if I happen to have dinner available for them, I will serve them dinner then. And then what they'll do is have their bedtime snack when my husband and I eat dinner. So they'll have their apple with peanut butter or something while we eat. I just make a point of making sure that I'm at the table with them whenever they're having that dinner. So finding that schedule. And actually, it's been nice for my husband and I too, because we do both like to eat a little bit later. So it's been great because he comes home late for work. We're not rushing to get to the table and deal with everything. He gets a bit more time with the kids. So you don't have to always have that traditional family meal time. They could have dinner after school too. And that usually helps with the witching hour because they're looking for protein and fat because their brain's been working all day. So totally understandable.
And then, so you commented about a bedtime snack. So that's a common practice in your household as well?
I have one, so of course they have one. If I don't eat one, then I absolutely get up in the middle of the night and I'm starving. Actually, when I work with a lot of the moms, a lot of them will say, I'm so sorry because I know it's bad for nutrition and I should probably be fasting, but I have a bedtime toast or something like that. And I'm like, there's nothing to be sorry about. If your body has told you that you need this piece of toast and it's bringing you joy, then just leave it at the joy and stop beating yourself up for it. It's not going to have any impact on what you're eating tomorrow. So absolutely, if that's what works for you, definitely.
There's a couple of questions in the chat here, so I'd like to pass them along to you. What about the idea of children choosing a food that they never have to eat? This was a deal when I was a child. Or is it about reintroducing a food over and over again so they will eventually eat it?
So for the first question, I don't think there's anything wrong, especially if you're interested in going down this path and giving kids control. That's probably one of the best ways you can give your kids control is saying, what's one ingredient you don't want mommy to cook for you? And don't cook it for them. They might readdress it in a few months once they've started diving in and having a different relationship, thinking like that. But I think that's actually a really great idea, having a no. I hate peppers, like red peppers. I'll eat them because they're in things, but that would be for me as an adult, my non-negotiable. So I think that's actually a great suggestion. And the second question, can you repeat it to me?
Of course I can. Should we be reintroducing a food over and over again so a child will eventually eat it?
It depends on how you're introducing it. So if you're doing it with a pressure type style of you have to try this 5 times before you decide you don't like it or something like that, I would say don't do it. But if you're finding creative ways to integrate it into dishes or something like that, and it's a stress-free situation for everybody, especially if they're a little bit older, you could keep reintroducing. I would give a good amount of time between that though. Don't do it 5 nights in a row for dinner. Maybe once a week or every couple of weeks saying, oh, mommy added a couple mushrooms. If you don't want to eat them, just pick them out or something like that. So don't go out of your way to make multiple meals for everyone in your family, but do go out of your way to let your kids know that they don't have to eat every aspect of the dish you've created. Let them explore what they want for now. You'll be surprised, especially even my 3-year-old, I'll give them a little bag of Smart Sweets or something like that. And he's tuned in. He'll hand me back half if he doesn't want them right now and say, I'll come back to these later. I want to save this for now. I don't feel pressured to finish it. And often, even especially at dinner now, my kids will pile their plates with vegetables because we're not forcing them to do it. And that's been a huge dynamic change for us. And then they also have nights where they eat bread, and that's okay too.
What about children who are truly hooked on sugar? How do you move them forward to healthier habits without making sugar the bad guy?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So what I'll generally do right off the bat, especially if I've been using or whoever I'm working with has been using that negative language around sugar, there's a good chance that the relationship they have isn't that they're hooked on sugar, it's that there's a scarcity mindset there where they're like, oh, well, I won't normally have sugar, or I know I'm not going to get sugar for another week now because I've loaded up on it this weekend. So they're going to binge on it because they don't think they're going to get it again. So changing the language of you can have a carrot you can have a candy today. Let's save a bit for later so that we can enjoy it again tomorrow or something like that. And so trying to reduce that scarcity mindset. I find even with adults, when we're trying to come off a diet because we haven't had pizza or something, I'm so guilty of this because we just added cheese back into our life. I binged on pizza because it was scarce for me for so long. And once I had my fill of it and I was able to manage my mind and understand that pizza was no longer a scarcity, that stopped being an issue that happened. So just removing the touchy subject style attachment we have to sugar is a good place to start. There's a lot of great articles online. There's one dietitian whose name is Nicole Cruz, Cruz, and she's got an incredible resource for parents that are interested. She practices from the same circumstance I do with intuitive eating. She talks all about sugar.
Interesting. This question's more about seaweed, and you've done some meal preparation for Cascadia with seaweed. What are some interesting pairings, some flavor pairings with seaweed that you would recommend?
So we always kind of jump to that nice Asian style that we're used to with seaweed and adding soy sauce and stuff like that. And so that's great, but I like to sneak seaweed in. So like I said at the beginning of my talk, seaweed's a great addition when you're making soups and stews, no matter what the flavor profile is, because it also helps make food more digestible. So yeah, the pasta that I made is Italian in flavor because it's got a heavy basil flavor. So that's a really great combination. Because seaweed's so neutral in flavor, you could basically just create a salt out of it. So what I do is I oven dry the seaweed and then I blend it up with a little bit of sea salt, and I just actually use that as a topper. So it could go with any flavor profile. It could go on pizza. You can add it into a nice pumpkin soup or something for some umami. So really the flavor profiles are limitless. It's just getting past that brain thought of I have to wrap it around some rice or something. Just treat it like any other vegetable, and that's just the basic starting point.
Great. This one goes back to the sugar conversation and language around treats. How if we're talking about not providing a scarcity mindset, we don't want to make sugar the bad guy. We don't want to have guilty feelings about the food that we choose to eat. We want to feel joy in the food we eat and in that moment, enjoy that moment. So how do we move forward with language around treats?
So the first thing you can do is to stop referring to it as a treat, because what we're doing is if I give my kid an apple, they're just having a snack, right? But at the same time of day, if I give my kid a cupcake, all of a sudden we're having a sugary treat, and that changes the brain to think of it differently. So just normalizing food is a great place to start, and not separating something healthy as a normal piece of food with something we would deem unhealthy as a treat. So once a week, I'll pick my kids up from school with, a sugary snack, but it's just a snack. And then any other day I'll pick them up with some berries or something like that. So integrating it into your routine is a normal part, and then avoiding any of that negative language afterwards about any kind of guilt or, sugar's bad or something like that is a really great place to start. You kind of have to find what works for you. And this isn't a movement or a diet where we're needing to be perfect. I'm not perfect. We still have difficult nights. I still have to manage my mind internally sometimes to remind myself that even though I'm into nutrition, that I don't need to push that on my children. And I'll let them see me enjoying that too. So I'll have a cookie with them or something and be like, oh, this is so delicious. I'm so happy that I'm able to enjoy this right now with you as a snack.
I see. The language has a big part in this.
Huge part. Yeah. Even for parents, as soon as you stop attaching that need for guilt after you've enjoyed a treat, it can really start rewiring your brain. It's called neuroplasticity, where you're starting to change your cognitive thought patterns, and it can have a huge lift off your shoulders of feeling bad for eating things that really they might not be the most healthy, but they're not that bad.
What about sustaining your feeling of fullness throughout the day? So when we're talking about closing that kitchen in between meal times and snack time, um, what kind of foods would you recommend for children to eat to keep their energy levels up?
That's a great question. So you have to play around because every kid is so unique. And even within your household dynamic, separate your children as unique entities when you're starting to feed them because it helps you understand which kid needs which. So one of my kids thrives better on a carb and the other kid really needs fat, especially if you're kind of jumping onto the plant-based bandwagon that a lot of people are. They struggle because they don't reintroduce enough fat to their diet. Animal protein is so saturated, so we feel satiated for longer after a piece of cheese or something because it takes our stomachs longer to break the food down. So adding in the avocado or some flax oil or a handful of nuts if it's appropriate, and you can have them, most schools you can't, or seeds of some sort are great. Carbohydrates are excellent. So if your kids are smoothie fiends or something like that, I'll often boil some yams and I'll serve that. I'll blend that into my smoothie to give a sustained complex carbohydrate to keep my kids going for longer, even for myself. And learning what each of those energy sources do. So carbohydrates are the quickest source of energy. They produce something called glycogen. They're fast. Our body can break them down, but we can only hold so much glycogen in our body. And then once we've run out of the carbohydrate, we move to fat and then protein. So carbs and fat are your top two.
Okay, interesting. Can you just give me some examples of the carbs and fats that you would give to your children?
Yeah, so any fruits and vegetables would be good for carbs, just finding what works for your kids. And obviously, it's nice because you can kind of eat as many as you want for fruits and vegetables. So letting them fill their plate and fill up. If they have a big bowl of grapes, they're getting a good amount of fiber and carbs and some sugar, and that's fine. And then if you were serving them grapes, you could either drizzle them with a nice nut butter, or you could serve like a trail mix on the side or something just to add a little bit of nut fat into there. Like I said, smoothies are an excellent way to blend all those snacks together if your kids will do that, or just pack a bento box of snacks. That's what I typically do when I'm out and about, and I offer them plenty of options. And throughout the day when we're out and about, they'll have a cucumber and then they'll move on to the berries and then they'll have some nuts or something like that. Cheese is an excellent source of protein and fat. So, if your kid eats cheese, then get some good cheese and feed it to them. And, you have to let them communicate to you what's working for them. And some days are going to be difficult, but they are for adults too. I mean, I've had a couple of days this week where I unfortunately didn't prioritize time to eat. And by dinner time, I was a mess. But I knew I was a mess and I knew why. So the next couple of days, I made a point of making sure I was eating enough for what worked for my body.
So you talked about separating your children as two entities. Here's a question that I empathize with on a very regular basis. My older child decides that she doesn't want to eat something or doesn't like something and makes a deal out of it. And then the young one, of course, doesn't want to go anywhere near it. How can you help me with that?
It's harder when they're younger, especially when the young one is super impressionable around kind of that 3 to 5-year-old range. So switching the dynamic of how you respond right off the bat. So a lot of the times, especially the older ones, I find with my daughter, that's attention grabbing behavior and not her actually making a statement that she dislikes something. So I'll often not even acknowledge what she's saying. And I won't force my younger one to eat that day, but I'll reintroduce it at a time when my other kid's not around to see if it was truly that they didn't want to try it or if it was just because we were playing an intention getting game that day. And offer a banana or an apple or a strawberry, whatever fruit that your kids love, have on hand as an alternative or vegetable or whatever.
Yes, I'm grateful that spring is here and there's more fresh fruit and vegetables around. It
Yes.
sure makes those snacks, those healthy snack options, those good snack options more available.
Well, and once you start to build that trust a little bit, especially with your older kid, you can have a more open conversation saying, hey, so and so, when you talk like that around your brother or sister, mommy notices that your brother or sister doesn't want to try the food because they're getting scared because of you. Could you help mommy be a superstar? And even if you don't like the food, just don't say anything. It's okay if you choose not to eat it, but just don't say that it's yucky today. And so we can see if your brother likes it or something like that.
Yes.
But don't put shame on them for it. Just make them feel like they're helping you out as opposed to saying you're doing something bad.
Yes. Yeah. And that quite often works better than the alternative.
Huge.
People are asking for other resources. So you gave us one name, Nicole Cruz, I think it was.
Yeah.
I'll ask for Kennedy. Kennedy, if you're there, can you look for Nicole Cruz and pop it in the chat?
The top resource you can look up is especially for parents, the best place to start is to learn how to eat intuitively for yourself, and then you can mimic it for your kids. So there's a book called Health at Every Size by Linda Bacon. I'll populate the chat. And then there's also the Intuitive Eating book by Evelyn Treble, which I'll write down here. Those are two great places to start.
Excellent. Well, that would be a really good help. There we go. Excellent. Kennedy's popping some in there. That's great. You know, it's so hard when you're just in the swing of things, especially with two working parents outside of the household and children that are in school and daycare and that sort of thing, to integrate these new practices. But I see so much benefit and value if it makes life just a little bit easier, especially in that quality time, that time you spend with your children in between pickup and bedtime. You know, that's such an important time of day. And the last thing we want to do is be arguing over what they're eating and what they're not eating or what their behaviors are. So I really sincerely appreciate all these tips. And I look forward to going home and talking through them with my husband and talking to my daughter about it, and then leading by example for our little guy who's only 2.
So I popped those books up there for you. And then I also added an Instagram handle called Work Week Lunch. You guys, she is life-changing. She is all the food. She doesn't do articles and stuff about intuitive eating, but she is an intuitive eating graduate. I think it's like $6 a month to access her plans. Every single recipe she offers can be accommodated for gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, whatever you want. Her meal ideas are incredible. So for people that are just lacking inspiration, check her out. You can even just get inspiration looking at just her Instagram. But she's got a great one. Just look up Division of Responsibility and you will find a million resources that are out there. Some of the women I work with are creating programs for families to work together on this stuff too. So this is a movement that's just going to gain more and more traction over the next little while, and it's just going to become on more and more people's radar.
Excellent. I'm so glad you incorporated a little bit about seaweed, and I hope people try to incorporate some seaweed into their diets as well in all sorts of creative uses. I didn't know that it helped with our digestion, so that's a really great tip. I like that a lot. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Chantal. This was really intuitive or really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.